Have you ever woken from a dream so vivid, so disturbingly real, that you couldn't shake the feeling it left behind? It wasn't just the imagery, it was the way it lingered, like a shadow clinging to your every step. My name is Eliandra Whitmore. As an archivist, I've spent years uncovering secrets buried in history, cataloging whispers of the past. But nothing I've read or experienced could have prepared me for the story I'm about to share. This isn't just about a dream. It's about a doorway to something far darker, something that even now feels like it's watching. It all started with a recurring nightmare. Night after night, I found myself in an ancient study. The room was cloaked in shadows, lit only by the dying glow of a single candle that cast trembling shapes on the walls. The air was damp and carried a metallic tang, as if the room itself were bleeding. A stack of letters sat on the desk, their edges curling with age. At first glance, they seemed ordinary, but as I reached for them, the words began to fade, dissolving like smoke in the air. I felt a strange pressure, as though the room itself disapproved of my intrusion. And then I noticed it. The first time, it was just a flicker, a glimpse of movement in the corner of my vision. But each night, it grew clearer, a shadow standing just beyond the reach of the candlelight. It never moved, but its presence was suffocating. The letters seemed to pulse, almost as if they were alive, as fragmented phrases etched themselves into my mind. The truth lies within, and beware the watcher. The final night I dreamed of that study, something changed. The shadow moved. Slowly, deliberately, it leaned closer, and though I couldn't see its face, I could feel its gaze, a cold, invasive stare that seemed to pierce through my very being. I wanted to scream, but the air in my lungs felt thick, heavy, as though I were drowning. When I finally woke up, gasping for breath, my hands were trembling. The sensation of the letter's brittle edges lingered on my fingertips, as if I had truly held them. What unsettled me most wasn't the dream itself, but the faint, inexplicable symbol etched into my palm, a circle surrounding an unblinking eye. It wasn't there when I went to sleep. Was my mind playing tricks on me? Or had something followed me back? Before we uncover the truth about those letters and the shadow that lingers still, I need you to take a moment. Subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and prepare yourself. What I've uncovered since those nights will make you question everything you know about dreams, reality, and the boundaries between the two. It began on a night that should have been forgettable, but it quickly became anything but. I fell asleep expecting nothing more than the usual blur of dreams, but instead, I found myself standing in a room I had never seen before, a study that exuded an ancient, oppressive atmosphere. The walls were lined with towering shelves filled with crumbling books, their spines cracked and titles obscured by time. A faint, metallic smell lingered in the air, mingling with the scent of mildew. Each breath felt heavier than the last, as though the room itself disapproved of my presence. In the center of the room stood a desk, carved from dark wood that seemed to drink in the dim light of the flickering candle resting upon it. The candle's flame danced violently, as if it were struggling against an unseen force. On the desk lay a stack of letters, each sealed with crimson wax that looked unnervingly fresh. As I approached, the floor beneath my feet groaned like a living thing, its warped boards pressing against my soles in a way that felt unsettlingly deliberate. The silence in the room wasn't empty, it was dense, suffocating, filled with a faint hum just below the threshold of hearing. Then, without warning, the hum transformed into a sharp, echoing sound, the scratch of a quill against paper. I spun around, expecting to see someone behind me, but the room was empty. Yet the sound persisted, now joined by the faint rustle of parchment being turned, as if an invisible hand were working feverishly in the shadows. I turned back to the desk, and my gaze was drawn to the letters. Their surfaces were covered in intricate handwriting that seemed to shimmer and shift as I stared. When I picked one up, the ink began to fade before my eyes, leaving behind faint whispers that I could swear were forming words. Don't trust what you see, and the past never forgets. The wax seal on the other letters appeared to bleed, the crimson liquid slowly oozing out, staining the desk and dripping onto the floor. That's when I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. It wasn't just a vague discomfort. It was a tangible weight pressing against the back of my neck. My skin prickled as I turned my head ever so slowly, scanning the shadows. And there it was, in the far corner of the room, a figure barely discernible, cloaked in darkness so profound it seemed to devour the light around it. It didn't move, but its presence was undeniable. The figure's form was just a suggestion of something humanoid, its edges blending into the gloom. And then it shifted, just slightly, enough to let me see the faint glint of two eyes, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. My breath hitched as the whispers grew louder, merging into a cacophony of incomprehensible voices. They weren't just random sounds, they carried an urgency, a warning, but the words slipped through my grasp like water through my fingers. My hands trembled as I reached for another letter, desperate for answers. As soon as I touched it, the candle's flame extinguished, plunging the room into utter darkness. The voices stopped, replaced by a single deafening sound, the beating of a heart, slow and deliberate, yet impossibly loud. It wasn't mine. I woke up gasping for air, drenched in sweat. My bedroom was silent, but the sensation of that presence, that watchful shadow, lingered. I looked down at my hands, half expecting to see the crimson stains of the letters or the symbol etched into my palm again. Nothing. But the sound of that heartbeat echoed faintly in my ears, refusing to fade, as if it had followed me out of the dream and into my waking world. The dreams didn't stop, they only grew more vivid, more invasive. Every night, the study pulled me back, a twisted sanctuary where reality unraveled with each passing moment. I began to notice things that shouldn't have been possible, things that made my skin crawl. The desk was no longer the center of the room. It shifted, subtly repositioning itself each time I blinked. Objects that had been neatly placed, the stack of letters, a candlestick, an antique inkwell, were scattered when I turned back, as if they had been moved by unseen hands. The air grew thicker with every visit, pressing against my chest like an invisible force. Shadows on the walls writhed unnaturally, stretching and curling in ways that defied logic. They didn't mimic my movements but acted of their own accord, as though alive. And always, I felt the oppressive weight of that gaze, unseen yet undeniable. It wasn't just watching, it was waiting, as if biding its time for something I couldn't comprehend. One night, the whispers returned, louder and more distinct. They didn't just drift through the air, they seemed to crawl into my ears, invading my mind with fragmented words. Turn back, lost forever. The watcher comes. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't tear myself away. Something about the study compelled me, held me captive in its dreadful embrace. As I moved deeper into the room, my steps echoing unnaturally loud, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A door slightly ajar at the far end of the study. Pale light spilled through the crack, illuminating the floorboards in a sickly, flickering glow. The light didn't feel warm, it felt wrong, as if it didn't belong in this world. My pulse quickened as I approached, the whispers now blending into an almost rhythmic chant. With every step, the floor seemed to resist me, growing softer, spongier, until it felt as though I were walking on flesh. My breath hitched, and I hesitated. Behind the door, a faint sound emerged, a low hum, almost like someone breathing. The sound wasn't human, though. It was too deep, too hollow, resonating like the groan of an ancient, dying beast. The door creaked open wider as I stood there, trembling. Beyond it was not another room, but a void, an expanse of pure darkness, broken only by faint flashes of light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. My eyes strained to adjust, and that's when I saw it. Suspended in the void was a figure, the same one that had haunted the corners of my dreams. This time it was no shadow. It had form, gaunt, impossibly tall, with limbs that stretched far too long, and a face that wasn't quite a face. Its eyes, glowing faintly, locked onto mine. I couldn't move. My body felt paralyzed, rooted in place as the figure slowly tilted its head, as if studying me. Then, it extended one of its spindly arms, pointing directly at me. A sudden, overwhelming sense of dread flooded my mind. The whispers stopped, replaced by a single, thunderous voice that echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "You are not welcome here." Before I could scream, the floor beneath me gave way, and I plunged into darkness. I woke up in my bed, gasping for air, but the sensation of falling still clung to me, as real as the pounding in my chest. My bedroom was silent, but as I glanced around, I saw it, a faint glow emanating from the corner of the room. It was the same pale light that had spilled through the door in my dream. And for the first time, I realized, whatever haunted the study wasn't confined to my dreams anymore. It had followed me into the waking world. The study felt different that night, heavier, as though the walls themselves were pressing inward, desperate to keep me trapped within their ancient embrace. The flickering candlelight was weaker than before, barely piercing the suffocating darkness that loomed in every corner. As I stepped inside, a cold draft swept across my face, carrying with it a faint, metallic scent that made my stomach churn. The letters on the desk no longer appeared as a stack. They were scattered across the floor, their fragments forming patterns too deliberate to be accidental. I knelt to examine them, And that's when I saw it, the symbol etched into the floorboards beneath the desk. It was larger this time, glowing faintly, its intricate design of concentric circles, and the unblinking eye pulsating like a heartbeat. I reached out to touch it, my fingers trembling, but the moment my skin met the floor, a deafening sound erupted, a low, guttural hum that shook the very air around me. The shadows in the room began to shift violently, writhing like living creatures, their shapes twisting into grotesque forms that defied reason. Faces appeared within the darkness, distorted, agonized, their mouths opening wide as if to scream, yet no sound emerged. The air thickened, becoming almost unbreathable, and I staggered back, clutching at my throat. Then the letters began to move. One by one, they lifted off the floor, floating into the air as if guided by an unseen hand. The fragments of words on them glowed faintly, rearranging themselves into a single sentence that burned itself into my vision. "The Watcher is here." My heart thundered in my chest as the room plunged into total darkness, the candlelight snuffed out in an instant. The only illumination came from the glowing symbol on the floor, its pulsating light now erratic, as if struggling to remain alive. And then I felt it, a presence behind me. It was no longer just a feeling, it was tangible, a cold weight pressing against my back, sending icy tendrils crawling down my spine. I turned slowly, every muscle in my body screaming for me to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The figure from my dreams stood there, fully formed, its towering frame barely fitting within the confines of the room. Its limbs were unnaturally long, its fingers ending in sharp, claw-like tips that scraped against the wooden floor with a sound that made my teeth ache. Its face, or what passed for a face, was a void, its features replaced by the same unblinking eye that glowed faintly in the center of its head. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, merging into a single, guttural voice that spoke directly into my mind. "You were warned. Now you will see." The figure raised one of its clawed hands and pointed toward the desk. I followed its gesture, my eyes locking onto a single, unbroken letter that now rested at the center of the symbol on the floor. The wax seal on the letter began to crack, the crimson wax bubbling as if alive. Against every instinct screaming at me to flee, I stepped forward, compelled by a force I couldn't resist. As my fingers brushed the letter, the room erupted into chaos. The shadows surged forward, swallowing the walls and ceiling until there was nothing left but an endless void. The figure loomed closer, its unblinking eye growing brighter, illuminating countless other figures within the darkness, each one trapped, reaching out desperately, their faces frozen in silent screams. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone. My body was weightless, as if I were floating in that abyss. The letter crumbled in my hand, its fragments burning like embers as they fell, and the figure leaned in close, its voice cutting through the silence with terrifying clarity. "This is only the beginning." I woke up in my bed, drenched in cold sweat, my heart hammering so violently I thought it might burst. For a moment, I believed it was over. But then I saw it. The glowing symbol burned into the floor beside my bed, pulsating faintly, a chilling reminder that whatever haunted my dreams had now crossed into my reality. And in the distance, faint but unmistakable, I heard the guttural hum again, promising that the nightmare was far from over. The dream wasn't just a memory haunting me, it had begun to seep into my waking life. Each time I closed my eyes, I could feel the lingering presence of the figure, as if it were watching, waiting. But what unsettled me most was the symbol. It wasn't confined to the dream anymore. I found it drawn in the condensation on my bathroom mirror, etched faintly into the dust on my bookshelf, and even appearing as a fleeting shadow on the walls of my home. At first, I thought I was losing my mind, but deep down, I knew the truth. The dream wasn't just a creation of my subconscious. It was a warning. Desperate for answers, I began to search for any clue that might explain what was happening. I started by scouring online forums and archives for anything resembling the symbol I had seen. Days turned into sleepless nights as I pored over ancient texts and obscure folklore. That's when I stumbled upon a chilling discovery. In a forgotten corner of an online archive, I found an old, scanned photograph of a weathered leather-bound book. The title read, "The Watcher's Letters." My blood ran cold. The book described a collection of ancient letters, each tied to disappearances and inexplicable events spanning centuries. The letters were said to contain fragmented warnings, and whoever encountered them was marked, forever pursued by a malevolent force known only as the Watcher. I dug deeper, tracing every lead, until I found a connection that shook me to my core. The book mentioned a location, a crumbling estate deep in the countryside, abandoned for decades but rumored to be cursed. The description of the estate matched the study from my dream in chilling detail, down to the faint glow of candlelight and the oppressive atmosphere. I couldn't ignore the eerie synchronicity. Somehow, I had dreamt of a place I'd never seen, but that clearly existed. And worse, the book hinted that no one who sought the letters ever escaped the Watcher's grasp. Driven by a mix of terror and curiosity, I searched for more accounts tied to the estate. Old newspaper clippings described a string of disappearances in the area, all linked to the same location. One article detailed the story of a historian who had claimed to find the letters. He vanished shortly after, leaving behind only a cryptic note that read, "The truth lies within, but beware the cost." The more I learned, the more I felt the weight of the Watcher pressing against me. Each piece of information added to my dread, as if uncovering the truth only tightened its grip on my soul. Then came the final revelation, something so horrifying it stole the air from my lungs. In an old police report about the estate, I found a list of items recovered from the home during an investigation. Among them was a sketch of the symbol, the same one that had haunted my dreams. But what chilled me most was a faint, handwritten note beneath the sketch, for Eliandra. The note was decades old, yet it bore my name. My hands trembled as I stared at the words, unable to comprehend what they meant. How could something from so long ago be connected to me? Had I been destined to encounter the Watcher all along? My mind raced with questions, but none of them had answers. The lines between dream and reality blurred further. Objects in my home began to move on their own, just slight shifts, like a chair pulled an inch away from the table, or a book left open to a page I hadn't read. And always, there was the feeling of being watched. The shadows in my room seemed darker, heavier, as if hiding something just beyond the reach of light. Despite my fear, I knew I couldn't stop. The estate wasn't just a place from my dream. It was a piece of the puzzle, a link to the answers I desperately needed. But even as I resolved to visit the location, I couldn't shake the growing dread that I was walking straight into a trap. The Watcher wasn't just waiting for me. It had been pulling me closer all along. The decision to visit the estate was not one I made lightly. Every instinct screamed at me to stay away, but the pull was irresistible. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a compulsion, a force beyond my control. As I drove through the winding, desolate countryside, a storm began to brew overhead. Dark clouds loomed, casting an unnatural gloom that seemed to drain the world of color. By the time I reached the estate, the air felt thick with electricity, as if nature itself was warning me to turn back. The estate stood at the end of a narrow, overgrown path. Its silhouette was jagged and unnatural, like a gaping wound against the horizon. The building was in ruins, its windows shattered, and its once proud facade crumbling under decades of neglect. Yet, despite its decay, it exuded a strange, malevolent presence, as though it were alive and waiting. My chest tightened as I approached, my flashlight barely piercing the darkness that clung to the estate like a shroud. The moment I stepped through the broken doorway, the temperature dropped sharply. The interior was worse than I had imagined, a labyrinth of decaying rooms and hallways that seemed to stretch infinitely. The air was heavy with the stench of mold and something far more sinister, a metallic tang that reminded me of blood. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, the sound distorted and warped, as if the house itself were mocking my intrusion. It didn't take long before I began to notice strange things. Shadows flickered across the walls, moving independently of the dim light cast by my flashlight. At first, I thought it was a trick of the storm outside, but then I realized there were no windows in the hallway I stood in. The shadows weren't reflections, they were something else entirely, shifting and writhing like living creatures. I could feel them watching, their presence an oppressive weight that pressed against my mind. As I ventured deeper into the estate, I stumbled upon a room that made my blood run cold. It was the study from my dreams, perfectly preserved amid the decay surrounding it. The desk stood exactly as I had seen it, the symbol etched into the floor beneath, glowing faintly as if in recognition of my presence. The air here was suffocating, charged with a malevolence that made my skin crawl. The whispers began again, faint at first, but growing louder with each step I took. That's when I met him, a man standing in the corner of the room, barely illuminated by my flashlight. He was gaunt, his clothes tattered, and his face pale and sunken, as if he hadn't seen the sun in years. He introduced himself as Victor, the last known owner of the letters. His voice was shaky, his words laced with desperation. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his eyes darting nervously to the shadows. "It's already watching. Victor explained that he, too, had been drawn to the estate by dreams, compelled to uncover the secrets of the letters. He warned me of the Watcher, describing it as an ancient, sentient force tied to the letters, a force that fed on curiosity and fear. The letters, he said, were traps, each fragment of a warning designed to lure the unsuspecting deeper into its web. Once it marks you, Victor whispered, his voice trembling, it never lets go. As he spoke, the air in the room grew colder, and the whispers turned to a low, guttural hum. Victor froze, his eyes wide with terror. It's here, he breathed, backing away. Before I could react, the shadows in the room began to converge, swirling together like a living storm. The hum grew louder, vibrating through my skull, as the figure from my dreams began to materialize. Its towering frame emerged from the darkness, its unblinking eye glowing faintly as it stared directly at me. Victor screamed and bolted from the room, leaving me alone with the Watcher. My legs refused to move as it stepped closer, its movements deliberate and predatory. The whispers returned, merging into a single voice that echoed in my mind, "You cannot escape." In a final act of desperation, I reached for the desk, my hands fumbling across its surface until they found something, a single, intact letter. The wax seal bore the same glowing symbol as the floor, pulsating in sync with the Watcher's gaze. I tore it open, hoping for answers, but the contents were worse than I could have imagined. The fragmented words burned themselves into my mind. You have been chosen. The truth lies within, but it will cost you everything. The room erupted into chaos. The shadows surged forward, engulfing the walls and ceiling until there was nothing but darkness. The Watcher moved closer, its elongated limbs reaching out. I felt its icy grip on my shoulder, pulling me into the void. And then, just as suddenly as it began, everything went black. I woke up outside the estate, the storm raging around me. Victor was gone, and the estate loomed behind me, silent and impenetrable. My hands were empty, but I could still feel the weight of the letter, its words etched into my memory. The Watcher hadn't finished with me, not by a long shot. And as I drove away, the faint glow of the symbol appeared in my rearview mirror, a chilling reminder that the nightmare had only just begun. The storm raged relentlessly as I returned to the estate, the pull of the mystery stronger than my fear. Every instinct told me to run, but it was too late. I was already ensnared in the Watcher's web. The air grew heavier as I stepped inside, the oppressive silence broken only by the distant creak of wood groaning under the weight of time. This time, the estate felt different. The walls seemed closer, the shadows thicker, as if the house itself had come alive to watch my every move. As I ventured deeper, I felt the unmistakable sensation of being led, though I saw no one. Doors opened on their own, revealing narrow corridors that twisted and turned impossibly, leading me in circles until I arrived at a room I had not seen before. It was small, the walls lined with rotting bookshelves, and in the center stood an ornate pedestal. On it rested a weathered, leather-bound journal, its cover marked with the same glowing symbol that had haunted me for so long. The room pulsed with an unnatural energy, the air vibrating with whispers too faint to understand. My hands trembled as I opened the journal, its brittle pages crackling under my fingers. Inside were entries written by different hands over centuries, all recounting the same nightmare: the study, the letters, and the Watcher. The accounts spoke of fragmented dreams, cryptic warnings, and inevitable doom. One entry, dated over 100 years ago, caught my eye. The letters choose their bearer. Once marked, there is no escape. The Watcher claims all. The final page bore a chilling illustration, a sketch of the figure from my dreams, its elongated limbs and hollow, glowing eye etched in grotesque detail. Beneath it was a single sentence: "Do not let it speak its name." As I stared at the words, the whispers grew louder, blending into a guttural chant that resonated deep within my chest. The room began to tremble, and the pedestal cracked, sending a plume of dust into the air. Then I felt it, the presence I had feared all along. It emerged from the shadows, its towering form blotting out what little light remained. The Watcher's unblinking eye fixed on me, its glow pulsating in sync with the beating of my heart. It reached out with one of its impossibly long arms, pointing to the corner of the room. There, partially hidden beneath debris, was a box, a small, ornate chest sealed with heavy chains. Compelled by an unseen force, I moved toward it, my steps slow and reluctant. The closer I got, the colder the air became, until my breath fogged in front of me. My hands ached as I pried open the box, the chains falling away as if by their own will. Inside was a single letter, its crimson wax seal untouched. Unlike the others, This one bore no fragments of words. It was blank, save for the glowing symbol pressed into the wax. The watcher's voice filled the room, deep and resonant, echoing in my mind as if spoken from within my own thoughts. The truth is here. Speak, and it will set you free, or bind you forever. My throat tightened, and I felt a crushing weight settle on my chest. I knew this was the moment everything had been leading to, the choice that would decide my fate. If I opened the letter, I might uncover the truth, but at what cost? And if I didn't, would the watcher allow me to leave, or would it consume me here and now? Against every instinct, I broke the seal. The wax crumbled like ash, and the letter unfolded itself in my hands. Its contents were not written in ink, but burned into the paper, glowing faintly in the darkness. The truth is not for you to hold. You were never meant to escape. The room erupted into chaos. The shadows surged forward, enveloping the walls and ceiling until there was nothing but darkness. The watcher moved closer, its hollow eye consuming my vision. I screamed, but no sound escaped. Its voice thundered once more, "You are mine." In that moment, I felt my consciousness splinter, as though I were being pulled into the very fabric of the void. Flashes of the past, of the study, the letters, the journal, flickered in my mind, each image blurring into the next. And then, everything went silent. When I awoke, I was lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by unfamiliar faces. The doctors said I had been found unconscious in the middle of the countryside, miles from the estate. They asked me what had happened, but I had no answer. My memory was fractured, pieces of the events slipping away even as I tried to hold on to them. But the symbol was still with me. It appeared in reflections, in the corner of my vision, and even in my dreams. And though the watcher was gone, I could feel its presence, lurking just beyond the edges of my reality, waiting for the moment I would cross its path again. The nightmare wasn't over, it was only beginning. The hospital room was sterile, quiet, and unsettlingly still, but no amount of calm could erase the storm raging within me. I stared at the ceiling, trying to piece together what had happened, but my memories were fractured, like shards of a mirror reflecting only glimpses of the truth. The doctors asked questions I couldn't answer. How had I been found miles from the estate, lying unconscious on a dirt road? Why was my pulse irregular, my body freezing as though I'd been locked in ice? Their faces showed concern, but I knew they wouldn't understand. How could they? This was no ordinary nightmare, no mere psychological break. Something had followed me, something was still watching. Even now, I could feel its presence, faint but constant, like a cold hand resting on my shoulder. The symbol hadn't left me either. It appeared subtly at first, a fleeting pattern in the condensation on the hospital window, a shadow that didn't belong. Then it grew bolder. On the second night, I woke to find it carved into the underside of the hospital bed, glowing faintly in the darkness. I tried to call for help, but the words caught in my throat as the familiar whispers returned, faint but unmistakable. The dreams came back, too. This time, I wasn't in the study. I was wandering through endless corridors, each one darker and more suffocating than the last. The walls were alive, pulsating with a faint, sickly glow, and the air carried the metallic tang of blood. The whispers grew louder with every step, merging into a singular, guttural chant. You cannot escape. You were chosen. In the distance, I could see the watcher's unblinking eye, always just out of reach, always pulling me closer. When I woke, drenched in sweat and trembling, the whispers didn't fade. They lingered, crawling into the corners of my mind. I realized then that the boundary between my dreams and reality was gone. The watcher had tethered itself to me, and no amount of logic or reassurance could sever that connection. Its mark wasn't just a symbol, it was a claim. Desperate for answers, I began to dig deeper into the fragments of memory I had left. The journal, the letters, the estate, none of it felt real anymore, and yet, the evidence was undeniable. I found a police report on my phone from before I had blacked out, detailing the estate's dark history. It mentioned something I hadn't noticed before, a long-abandoned chapel on the property, said to house the final resting place of those claimed by the watcher. Why hadn't I seen it? Or had I, and the memory been wiped away? But the most chilling discovery was a photograph attached to the report. It was a group photo, faded and cracked, showing several men and women standing in front of the estate. My breath caught in my throat when I saw a familiar face among them, my own. I looked closer, and though the image was decades old, there was no mistaking it. It was me, dressed differently, my hair longer, but unmistakably me. How could this be? The whispers grew louder after that, almost as if they were mocking me, feeding on my confusion. And then came the visions. Flickers of moments I couldn't explain. A woman with my face signing an old, yellowed contract. The watcher looming in the background, its hollow gaze fixed on me. And finally, a single word written in blood across the walls of the study. Bound. I don't know what it means, but I can feel its weight pressing down on me. The watcher isn't just following me, it's waiting. And I know that one day, when the time is right, it will step out of the shadows and claim what it came for. So now I leave the story with you. Was this all just a dream? A cruel trick of the mind? Or something far darker? A force that exists beyond our understanding, reaching out through time to ensnare its chosen prey? And what does it want with me? If you've ever felt like something was watching you, lurking just out of sight, then maybe you've already been marked, too. Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think the watcher truly is? And if you've ever encountered a nightmare you couldn't escape, share your story. Don't forget to subscribe, because what happened to me may only be the beginning. And remember, sometimes the things we fear most don't wait for us to sleep. Sometimes they're already here, hiding in plain sight, watching.